Welcome to the Uplifters podcast, where every week I get the great privilege of talking to a woman who's doing big, brave things in the world. Today's guest is going to really help us put this in perspective. If you know her work, you know she writes about great, big courage with a capital C, the kind of life and death courage that most of us don't face, either even in the course of our lives, perhaps, or certainly not very many times. And it is yet the focus of so much of her work. And the fact that she's doing this work, though, takes the little courage, the daily courage that each of us practices and builds over the course of millions of decisions in our lives. And so my hope today is to explore with her how one great big courage informs the other little tiny daily moments of courage. Today's guest is Sahar Delijani, the author of the exceptionally beautiful book, Children of the Jacaranda Tree. It's one of those books that honestly, as soon as I finished it, I wanted to go reread it again so that I could lap up every last morsel of language and intimacy and connection and more deeply understand these rich human characters that she's created, living little acts of courage in times of great big courage. The book is internationally acclaimed. It was translated into 32 languages, published in more than 75 countries, if that gives you any sense of the desire for this book that is out there. I think I'm probably not the only one who was like, let's read it again and soak up more of it. Her second novel, For Every Person You Kill, arrives in spring of 2027. And I am just so, so grateful to have this time with you to talk about a topic I feel like you know in some ways more intimately than most. So, Sahar Delijani, welcome to the Uplifters podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really honored and happy to be here speaking about courage and uplifting with you.
So, to start things off, maybe set the stage for us by telling folks who haven't read your first novel a little about it. Since there is a somewhat autobiographical thread to it, it will help us understand just the setting of your courage.
Sure. So the book talks about the post-revolutionary political persecution in Iran after the 1979 revolution, which ousted the Shah. There were many people who were participants in that revolution. So the sort of the party, the Islamic party that came out of it victorious, as we now say, hijacked the revolution, wasn't the only force. There were many, many other forces, political forces, social forces, who had been fighting against the regime of the Shah for many years. So it was a people's revolution in so many ways. My dad was a student at a time. My mom was working, and they were both migrants from other parts of Iran who were now in Tehran, who had migrated to Tehran. So they were active during the revolution against the regime of the Shah, and then they sort of continued their activism, political activism, because they were like leftist, progressive activists after the revolution, because they realized, okay, so what we're getting is not really what we had fought for. And then the Islamic regime, as it took power, and another thing that happened, which is very fundamental, was that the war with Iraq broke out, with Saddam attacking Iran in 1980. So it was just a year after the revolution. So you can imagine it was very fragile. Just a year had passed. And it was a war that lasted 8 long years. It was like one of the longest and most devastating wars in the region and in the world ever since like the World War II, with like more than 1 million casualties on both sides. So my parents were active politically, and in 1983 there was this like last wave of arrests and imprisonments of political activists from all the other sort of political thoughts, and which this sort of persecution had already started after the revolution, 1980, but it just like everybody who was still out there was arrested in 1983, including my parents and my uncle and my aunts. Like everybody was very active in my family politically. And my mom was pregnant at a time with me, so which led to her giving birth to me in Evin prison, which is this notorious prison in Tehran. And so I stayed with my mother for about like a little more than a month. And then my grandparents raised me, my brother, who was 2 at the time, who was already staying with them. And then another cousin, because my aunt, my mom's sister, was also pregnant at the time, who was also born in prison, my cousin. So there were these like 3 grandchildren, 2 of them newborn, who were being raised by my grandparents, my mom's parents. And so this was sort of the basis of Children of the Jacaranda Tree. So basically, the circumstances in which my generation was born and how, it's about a life inside prison, but how also that imprisonment doesn't necessarily only, of course, mainly and fundamentally hurts the people who are inside, but also how it affects everybody's life outside the prison. And it sort of, in that first part of the book, it ends with the 1988 executions, because 1988 was the last year of the war with Iraq, between Iran and Iraq, after 8 years. And the Islamic regime and the supreme leader Khomeini at the time sort of thought that this was, as sort of a ceasefire, it was being brokered by the UN. They sort of thought that this was their last chance to get rid of any political dissent and any opposition to the Islamic Republic. So, in a matter of a few months, in the summer of 1988, they executed thousands of political prisoners who were still in prison. My parents had already, they were lucky enough to have already been released, but my uncle, my dad's brother, was still in prison, and he was executed. And he was the father of that cousin who was also born in prison. And so that was the first part. And the second part of the book sort of talks about all these children born in those years and how now they're in their 20s and how they're sort of deciding their own fate, and not only their own fate, but the fate of their country, and how they're deciding to be sort of participant in what is happening in their country, both politically and socially and personally, and what it means to be a child of that sort of tragedy and still try to fight for what your parents sort of started.
Yeah, it's that as you say that, it brings up for me again these big questions of courage because I think on one hand, it had to have been really scary to say, my family endured all of these unbelievable challenges. And now I'm going to take on the responsibility of telling those stories in a way that does them justice, both to the systemic losses that happened, but also to the very individual losses of life and family, and to humanize in a way that we can all see our own love and life in these stories. And so, as you asked yourself that question, and then I'm sure side by side saying, well, what did they fight for if not my ability to be able to tell these stories? What were those conversations like with yourself as you went off on as you set out to tell the stories?
Yeah. I can only say that these conversations with myself about this after the book was out, because while I was writing Children of the Jacaranda Tree, I talked to my parents, but I didn't really think of the aftermath of the book and the meaning of writing about this book. I just thought, like, we need to probably tell these stories. These are like kind of interesting and it's part of our history and so on. And then after the book was out, I just all of a sudden realized, oh my God, what I did was also in some ways betray secrets, because when we were growing up, my parents, we were still in Iran. I was 12 when we left. And when we would go to school, like my parents, of course, they had been released, but the society, not only the political system, but the society also sort of considered us and my family and what they have done, like anti-revolutionary and like against this regime that we fought to have and so on. So we were like pariahs, like there was this hostility towards us. So that's why we had to always, like, my parents had always told me, like, never to talk to anybody about this outside of our home and our community. I'm never to at school, to friends, to teachers, to nobody. So, and then of course when we left to California, none of that was valid anymore, but we didn't really talk about this stuff anymore because, like, geographically we were so far, nobody knew anything, nobody asked anything, so we just like sort of never talked about it until I decided to write the book. So it was sort of like going out there, not only writing the book, but just like talking about it like this in conversations and interviews and readings, and to just stand before all these people and say the things I wasn't supposed to tell anybody, you know? It was a very strange. I mean, like, it was very traumatizing in so many ways. To
Wow.
the point that my second book sort of talks about that. It sort of talks about the trauma of writing about trauma. Like, there's this whole phase of it that begins after you're done, you know? Because until then, you're just sort of in your room typing. You just sort of like with your parents and you talk to them and they're, they bless the book and they're like proud of you and it's good to go. And then there are all these questions that come up afterwards. And then you realize that you're also speaking for other people. I mean,
Right.
these are personal stories, but they're really my parents' stories. They're not, I mean, they are my stories, but the bulk of it is theirs. And I sort of
And your
became this.
perception of them.
Exactly. And my perception of those. So there's all these like things, these layers to it. And what I decide to tell, what I decide not to tell. Who gave me that power to make those decisions? I did out of nowhere. So, yes, there was a lot. I think, it was like when you think about the idea of courage, I think like that was the moment that I had to really sort of face up to what I had done and face the people and face all these questions. But at the same time, I always think, as myself, as sort of a secondary character to all of this, like I'm the writer, I'm the I have all the power, but in some ways I'm also the person who's trying to be this like medium, he's trying to connect these stories to other people and just thinks, okay, this just has to go through me, and I always think that like my parents were the ones who did such courageous things. Like they were out there, they went to prison for their ideals, and I was safe in my room writing those stories. So it's like interesting to think about courage in that way.
Yeah. And I think that question you ask of who am I?
Yeah.
And you are the person who has the gifts and the talents and the passion and the knowledge and experience and proximity to tell this. And so who
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, yeah, I know exactly. And then I tell myself, but who else? I'm sufficiently obsessed with these stories to tell them forever.
Yeah. And I mean, I point that out because I think we all have those questions when we're doing big, brave things. We say, but who am I? And like you, we are the person who has the passion and the interest and the ability to do it. So who else? And so to answer that question again and again and hear other people who like, I would be so sad if you hadn't done this, right? Like sad's not even the right word. What a freaking bummer for all of us if you hadn't done this because who else would have? I didn't know. That was not my experience. I can tell you about my grandparents' journey as migrant farmers in the Dust Bowl because I have proximity to that. I
Yeah,
understand the human cost of that. I understand the generational cost of that. I do not understand the generational cost of this war. And I wouldn't have any insight into it had you not been that translator for me to get a
yeah,
glimpse into it.
yeah, yeah. No, that's true. And there were moments in all of that, all of those years of talking about the book and just going over like what have I done? That, for example, my grandpa once came to the reading. His passed, but and then like everybody would go to him, and my grandpa didn't really speak English much, but everybody would go to him and they would say, you're the grandpa. And then he says, so hard, like everybody's coming to me and they're saying all these nice things to me, and nobody really talked about how I took care of you guys before. And I'm like, yeah. And then that was like, I'm just like, oh, I'm so glad. Like you have to be praised, and everybody has to know about the sacrifices you made, and all of those people, when these sort of tragedies, especially on a national scale, happen, it's like it sort of like really changes the society. in so many ways. And I always say, like, if like one person is imprisoned for their thoughts, or one person is killed for their thoughts, it's like it's a part of all of our societies that dies, that is killed, that is repressed, you know. So then there are all these people who aren't politically active, like my grandparents, and so many people who aren't, you know, but they're just like, you know, that support to give to your daughters. Okay, your daughters going out there trying to be revolutionaries, or are revolutionaries, and you're like just sort of home, or you're at work, and you just sort of, okay, I'm here so that you can do that. And I think that is another type of courage that we like seldom talk about, the people who support courageous people, you
Yes.
know.
Yes. And honestly, the grandmother love in the book is, as somebody who was raised by my grandparents, who, and it for totally different reasons, was taking care of me because of their child's choice in youth. I just felt so profoundly connected to it. And I think, again, that's why to we need stories like yours in this moment. We need to share it here broadly to people who have no connection to this war that we're discussing, specifically to the universal experience of sharing our stories and the value and importance of sharing those stories, so that we can all have the universal experience of humanity through the specifics of each
Yeah,
individual story, right?
yeah,
So that we
absolutely.
can find the courage to share whatever story we have access to.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah.
And as we talk about this second novel, it sounds like we joke in our family that our greatest gift is that we're slow reactors.
That's a good one.
Right? We're just like, probably should have been like scared out of my mind in that moment, or but I didn't realize it until too late. And it's helped us do a lot more brave things, probably. And yet to do them again, once we understand the
Yeah,
gravity and the possibility of what we're doing, that takes, I think, whole other levels of courage. So how
yeah.
are you wading through that? What is your energy like as you create this next book? As you think about sharing this book, what's different?
My God, yeah, you're right. You're like, you went through it once and you're doing it again. Well, you know, the
So
first thing
brave.
is so brave, or just insane. You know, one thing is that it took me over 10 years to write this second book. So a very long time. That were both personal reasons, that things happened in my life, but also I think I was just sort of postponing writing. You know, I was writing, I was always writing, and have been working on this book for like more than 10 years. But it just kept going back to it. Like I would write a part of it and then just think, okay, no, this doesn't work. And then like 2 years later, I would go and write other, like add other things or so. So like it was just like an on and off relationship with this book. And I remember perfectly, like the first, let's say 4 years, 3, 4 years after the first book was out, even the idea of talking, like I thought, okay, if I publish another book, then I'll have to talk about it. And I couldn't, you know, I just couldn't, it was just too much, you know, so I think I just kept, you know, pushing that. And then sort of like years passed and as I would just like keep going back and forth to this book, I think one thing I realized, and I kind of like knew it at the time with the first book, but I got older as well, you know, a little bit wiser, and just thought about these things for such a long time, that I realized that this is not about me, and this is not about my story and what happened to my parents. The stakes are so high. This is happening to a lot of people all over the world. And the fact of like touring different countries at the time with Jacaranda Tree helped me, because I would go like to Argentina, I would go to Colombia, I would go to Germany, I would go to Greece, I would go to Montenegro, you know, and people would just come to me and like, and to Romania, and then people would come to me like, this is like my story, or this is like the story of my mother. And I realized, wow, this is like such a personal, intimate story. It was just like everyone's story, you know. and they identify it with it, not just like, oh yeah, I mean, like you made it so human, but just like, no, 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 it happened to me too, or my friend too. Or in Argentina, they were like, yeah, we have the disappeared. We have so many thousand people who were, disappeared by the regime, by the Argentinian regime. So I realize that this is just so much bigger than me, and I need to get myself together and really think about this again. So forget about, I mean, of course, I didn't write about the trauma, writing about trauma, but I think this is also an important part of it. Like, what happens to us who talk about this and all of these things, because this is part of that tragedy. Why are we telling? Why did we have to live a life to be telling these stories? Why couldn't we just tell other stories? So like, I think it was just sort of that, like there was a lot of like processing going on in my mind, and that's why I thought, okay, I have more to say about this and these stories, and I need to finish this book, and I need to put it out there. So that was sort of what happened the second time.
Yeah. For anyone who is listening to this and trying to muster up the courage to do their own big, brave thing, I think one of the things we can take from your story is to constantly reconnect to purpose and to ask ourselves who will be impacted by this work? Who might benefit from me
Yeah.
doing this big, brave thing? And then to also come back to how do I make it sustainable for myself to keep doing big, brave things? So, how do you take care of your energy, your mind, your body, your spirit to do this work?
That's a good question. Well, I'm a big believer of community, and like
Mm-hmm.
building community and building friendships and
Mm-hmm.
just talking to people about like what they're doing and what their fears are, and what
Mm-hmm.
they want their life to look like, and who they want to benefit in those ways. I think doing that and just talking to people all the time and being surrounded by, friends and family, and then my husband, who's a huge source of passion and support and love. And I think all of that is just like surrounding yourself with that energy, I think is fundamental. I mean, it was what saved us in Iran, like when we were still living in Iran, in those first years after my parents were released, like all of my parents' friends, all of our community were other people they had met in prison. So like we were of this community of prison friends, and like it was just them, and they would just give us so much love, and that saved us. That made us feel safe more than anything. So I sort of tried to sort of recreate that for myself, wherever I am. And then reading and cooking, and then like taking time off, I think is also really important, just to like not think about it, and try to think about other things and do other things, and I don't know, swim and travel and things like that. I think that's really fundamental. I think we need to always let all of our feelings to go through us. Like, don't stop anything, like whatever feeling you have. If you're feeling desperate, if you're feeling lazy, if you're feeling tired, like all of that has a reason, and we shouldn't push any of them away, and live them. And then I'm sure once we live them, and we live them honestly, then we can move on to the next feeling of like passion and production, and all of that. And that's another thing. Like, I try to just be really honest with my feelings as much as possible. I don't know, but I believe in that.
It's a beautiful word for it too, honesty.
Hmm.
It's honesty with ourselves, and that I think is one of the most courageous acts that we can practice.
I think like without it, I mean, I'll be very lost, because then like, if I'm lying to myself, then I really don't know, you know, in this world that we're living in right now.
Right.
Mm.
And how could you create honest work if you're not honest with yourself?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
dishonest work does more harm than good. So
Yeah,
it's actually all dependent on that.
yeah, yeah. No, very true.
You talk about community, and of course, that's the whole reason I created this podcast, is so that we'd all be able to saturate our brain waves with some uplifting stories of courage in a world where The entire algorithm is built to amplify division and conflict and every quiet fear that we have. And I think we just need to need to blanket ourselves in stories of people saying, yeah, I'm scared and I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly. And seeing other people do it too,
yeah.
because you're not the only
Yes.
one
Yes.
who's
Yeah.
trying to be brave. I think there
Yeah.
is this like, we're constantly trying. I don't think none of us are like born brave or are just inherently brave or are brave all the time. Like there are so many times that we aren't, and someone else is brave for us, maybe.
Mhm.
I think also watching like what
Mm.
everybody else is doing and how brave they are and how they are working so hard for this world that is on fire to just get a little bit better, or to just put out the fire a little bit. I think that's really, I mean, to me, that's really, really inspiring and really helps me work more and get back to it.
It's be brave for me sometimes. I think that's such a beautiful
Yeah.
concept. So each person who is on the Uplifters podcast nominates another guest, someone who gives her courage through their actions. So who do you nominate?
I nominate Yilda Ali, who's this wonderful friend, amazing person, and she is sort of an Afghan artist, an activist, and community organizer. And she was like one of the first people when I came to New York 3 years ago. And just as I came to the city, these protests in Iran, the Woman Life Freedom Movement,
Mm.
happened. And she was one of the first people who reached out to me and like put me in touch with EST Media, which is this media that talks about like, Southwest Asian stories, to sort of talk about, what is happening in Iran. And that helped me so much. These are like, when these things happen, like you're just so like, what can I do? What can I do? And someone just gives you an opportunity to talk about it a little bit. And it becomes so fundamental for you to just like survive those days,
Mm.
also emotionally. And I think she just has this like grace and has this incredible way of bringing people together while doing so much. Like, she's pregnant with her second child, and like and like trying to come up with all these different ideas of how like to make life in New York City better. And she's a DJ at the same time. So I mean, there's like she's doing so many things, and always with just like such ease, it seems.
Mm.
So I wanted to sort of nominate her for the next
She
place.
sounds amazing, and I can't wait to talk to her. And it reminds me that the people who inspire us the most are generally the ones who aren't just doing one thing. They're
Yeah.
people who are excited about life and finding some multifaceted richness in the experience. And yeah, as I'm sort of like mentally cataloging the women who inspire me and the women we've had on our podcast, and that word multifaceted comes
Hmm.
up so often. So I think there's something to that I want to explore a little further. As uplifters, we love to uplift uplifters. How can we support you and your personal or professional missions right now?
I think listening and reading, listening to us and to me and to us in general, because I feel like, we who are coming from, I mean, I'm a first generation migrant. I was 12 when I came here. I lived many years here, and then I lived in Italy. So I've just sort of like, I've just been trapped, like going around the world so much, and finally found my home in New York City. I think stories of our region are so simplified. I don't think that it's not because there aren't people who are listening and paying attention, but that they've become so simplified. It's just become so, everything's become so black and white. And I really think that if our readers and our listeners are open to our complexities, which are like the complexities of anybody else in the world, that would just be so, so helpful, to just be open to different stories that come from that place, and not one story, so many stories. And all those so many stories also have so many different layers to them. I think because sometimes you just feel like, oh yeah, well, I've heard the Iranian story already. I heard the Afghan story already. I heard it, but it's like, no, you haven't. Like, how can you even say that? Like, we're like, we're in a complex society with complex histories and upheavals and so much up and down. And there's no way that our story. Like, there's just no way you maybe know one of our stories. So I think that openness to complexities, because when our complexities are denied, our agency is denied, and we can't be narrators of our own stories anymore. I think that would be one thing that I would really appreciate.
That is one of the most meaningful answers I've ever heard to that question.
Oh, thank you. Something I think about a lot, because we face this thing a lot every day. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And we do make so many assumptions
yeah,
about, especially when things feel distant from us in some way. And it is sort of the dumbing down of our society right now. That we're like, I heard 1 2 minute TikTok about this, so I know all there is to know.
exactly.
And it is
It doesn't
singularly that one
speak well
person's
about
experience.
anyone. Yes. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's not good for us. It's not good for Americans. It's not good for anybody, this sort of
Right.
dumbing down of stories. I think it only creates hostility,
Mm.
misunderstanding, which
Mhm.
leads to hostility, then to division, and to, I mean, and then we see what is happening in the world. And that is a result of this, because it's been
Mm.
going on for decades, if not for centuries.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah, the ripple effects impact all of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And we need so much more understanding to create that change. For anyone who's listening to this, I'll do my best to recap some of the key courage capital building lessons in here. And to Sahar's point, none of us are born with more courage. We build courage through every lived experience, both that we have, but also that those who came before us have. And it is a matter of building tolerance for courage.
Oh, yes, yes. That is perfect. Yes, yes, exactly.
And that
Yeah.
threshold, right? It helps us take the next courageous step.
And also because we live in this world now, but there are also so many good things about it. We live,
Mm,
we have so many, but anything we're able to do now as women, as minorities, is because someone else fought for it in the
yeah.
past. Nothing like the freedom, equality, like none of these are things that just like fall from the sky,
No,
and
it's
you know,
never happened by accident. And it's
never.
never happened in a straight line.
Never. Yes, absolutely not. There's just so much. You go, you take 2 steps, you take 5 steps back. But there are people who are like willing to fight the fight. And there have been people
Mhm.
who've done that for generations for us all over the world, in America, in Iran, anywhere. So, like, I think it's important to realize that nothing is given. And if we don't
Mm.
have the courage to at least
Mm.
protect the things, that we have, it'll be gone before we know it.
Yeah.
you know at
Yeah.
least respect for those who fought before us. We need to fight
Mm.
that, to keep. I mean, it'll
Yeah.
be gone before we know it. No, no, like a dictatorial society it wasn't inherently dictatorship. There wasn't like nothing wrong with it because people think like that. It's an accumulation of so many historical events and political events
Mm.
that brings it to that.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. The fear mongering and the hate was developed over practice too, and so can courage be
Yeah,
built in the same way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And were people who were fighting before my parents. So, like, I mean, it's a light fight that goes on, and we have to have the courage to protect it as well as
Mm.
moving forward.
Yeah. And I think then lesson one here is to constantly reconnect to purpose. And that the most courageous people you see in the world are the ones who not only have a strong sense of purpose, but surround themselves with reminders of why courage matters. And that's what helps them get out of bed and make these brave choices each day. I think it is also surrounding ourselves with community and people who remind us what we're capable of and what witnessing other people's courage, giving ourselves a sense of greater belief and hope that we can cultivate courage is allowing ourselves to take the time we need to build that courage and to allow breaks and rest to restore our stores of courage and to acknowledge, as you said, with honesty, the complexities of this and to trust that we are not wrong because it is not easy, that we can feel scared and sad and hurt and weak and still be courageous at the same time. And that whatever courageous steps we take are worthwhile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 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 And all those little steps count.
Yes, little investments.
Yeah.
Sahar, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the courageous work that you're doing in the world. I can't wait to devour your next book and your next.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thanks for watching the Uplifters podcast. If this inspired you, hit subscribe and tap the bell to stay uplifted. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a little lift today. Big love.
Painted water sunshine with rosemary and thyme. Dwell in the perplexing, though you find it vexing. Toss a star and hover, be your own best lover. Relish in a new prime, plant a tree in springtime. Dance with idle hindsight, bring the sun to twilight.